Welcome to the Ali Maz Show, where we focus on human being and spiritual living with a deep inclination for the divine. Together, we delve into the seen and the unseen. We explore what it means to be well and whole from the inside out. Over the last 17 years, I've been focused on how movement, breath, and the power of the mind can liberate us from the template of our conditioning and carve a path to live a life that is truly authentic. My hope is that my guests will inspire and expand you to continue to choose the life that is yours. Today's guest is Dr. Stephanie Colantonio. Dr. Colantonio is a board certified physician and herbalist who integrates conventional medicine, plant medicine, and mindfulness at her holistic reproductive health practice in LA. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Steph.
Thank you. Just listening to the introduction of the podcast makes me so excited. It's so
Aw.
good.
I mean, I know you get all of those things on such a deep level. And when I was dreaming up this podcast, you were a dream guest of mine for so many reasons. One being you are a dear friend to me, like a sister. We speak the same language in many ways. You are also my doctor. And I have never really liked my doctors, and I love you.
That's an honor.
And and I just love what you're doing within your practice and how you are supporting, in particular, young women who, I share that heart as well, the connection to teens and young women, but really all people supporting on not just the conventional medicine route, but the integration of, yes, herbs and plant medicine, but also heart and mind and soul. And so I'm curious, it's sort of a big question, but how? How did you get started doing this? Because it's not a
Yeah.
traditional doctor path.
It's such a good question, and thank you for asking it. I could probably tell the story over the course of a day, but I'll try to give the cliff notes. But as you know, I started out my career as a pediatrician in conventional medicine and really struggled during my medical training, during residency, and with my own health and also with what I was doing. And one of the things I would do in residency when I was struggling is looking at my personal statements to medical school and to training, and they were both all about the mind-body connection. And I looked at the work I was doing there, and I was like, this is such important work, and I'm so glad that we have people doing this, but it's not what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, I'm not really getting into that sort of holistic piece of patient care. And also simultaneously with my own health, I was struggling. Mostly, I think at the root of it was burnout and just a misalignment with the work that I was doing. And so I started seeking out traditional Chinese medicine for the first time. I grew up in Boston in a very, science-based conventional medicine family. And so the idea of acupuncture and Chinese herbs was something completely new to me. But I started really prioritizing using that modality for my own health and started getting better. I wasn't having to take medications every day anymore to help headaches and things like that. So there were sort of these seeds planted during my training to just really start to think about focusing more on nature medicine and holistic healing. Around the same time, I really started to get involved with my own therapy, my own sort of deeper healing into those sort of deep and dark childhood wounds. And, with that, just sort of slowly was following this thread. And it makes a lot of sense too, because if I look back on my childhood, my favorite memories are going to, like Walden Pond with my dad on nature hikes and, hunting for plants and salamanders. So there was always this very rooted nature based part of me. And when things really started to change course was in during the pandemic. Like so many of us had big transitions or transformations. And at that time, I had left my work in conventional pediatrics. I was actually planning to move to Madrid to be with a then partner and become a pediatrician there. Sorry if you hear a little bit of funny noise. My cat is like crawling across the desk. Um, but so, during the pandemic, I left conventional pediatrics, and I had time to really slow down and be still. I spent 6 weeks in Cape Cod pretty much by myself, going for walks in nature and really thinking about, what do I want to do and who do I want to serve? Because what I was doing before wasn't it. And one of the things that really came to me was reproductive health. I loved working with the young women in pediatrics who were sort of on their way out of pediatrics, and just really focusing on connecting to their bodies, their menstrual cycle, a lot of mental health. And part of that is probably because I went through my own journey of just, really bad experiences with contraception, bad experiences with abortion as a teenager, and just wanting to offer something different and wanting to offer what I would have wanted at that time. And so that was, again, like these little sparks of like, okay, we're really going to dive into reproductive health. I did end up making it to Madrid. I was there for several months. And that's also, I wasn't working. And that time away from work was so crucial. It's sort of like the winter that we're in now, like planting seeds in the fertile void. That's kind of exactly what it was. It was planting seeds for this practice that I was going to start once I came back to LA. And throughout all of this time, there are always whispers from the plants, so like medicina natural, natural medicine, nature medicine, and just sort of following that thread and those whispers, and really delving into a study of plant medicine and herbalism, of mindfulness. I'd always had a practice, but really learning deeper into it.
Mm. And so you get back to LA, and I think this is kind of around the time when we met. And
Yeah.
how do you go from, so you have all of your conventional medical training, you're now starting to really listen to these whispers of what you're feeling. You've taken that winter, that time to think of what's next, to dream up the next piece, and then you launch a business, which is sort of like, I don't know how much business education you get in medical school, but I'm assuming none. So now you've kind of gone med school, this whole natural route, and now you're stepping into being an entrepreneur. What does that look like in Los Angeles? What does that look like?
Terrifying. You're absolutely right. We don't learn anything about this in medical school. And I'm really grateful that I was connected to a physician named Pamela Weibel, who holds these master classes for doctors, nurse practitioners, all sorts of folks in the healthcare profession who really want to do something else. They want
Mm.
to, you know, have a job that feels more aligned, and the conventional system just isn't doing it for them. So I'm super grateful that I was connected with her, and I actually started a mastermind group with her while I was still in Madrid. So I was starting to learn about things like, how do I get malpractice insurance when I'm on my own? How do I find a clinic space that works for my budget? And how do I
Yeah.
create a low overhead model? And these are all brand new concepts to me of even having to think about these things. So it's definitely a steep learning curve. It was an uncomfortable learning curve, but it was pretty remarkable. Once you start just doing it, the things get done, and you learn and you evolve and you change. And so that group with Dr. Weibel was incredibly helpful for me during that time, that sort of incubation period. And then once I was back and had launched the practice, still like constantly learning different things and different approaches to look at the business side. And I'm still learning that now, to be honest.
Sure. Yeah, I totally get that. And I'm obviously not a doctor, but I know what it is to want to serve and help and show up in one way. But then at the end of the day, when your people leave the space and you're like, okay, I got to pay these bills, I got to do all these invoices, there's a lot of work connected to be done outside of just the thing that you most want to do and how you want to
Yeah.
serve.
I really appreciate you acknowledging that because, at least in this moment, I'm doing all of that stuff on my own. And I think people sort of forget, especially if you do have your own private practice, any kind of healing practice, that like that is a lot of work, and it's not always what sort of we were designed to do. And so I really appreciate that you're acknowledging that.
Yeah, no, and I'm just so like just honor, like just deep bow gratitude for the work you do in the world, and honor and just like so much respect. And I'm curious, as a woman in business, as a doctor, and I want to get into this, that, menstrual cycles is also a deep passion that we both share and work in our different worlds with it. But for you as a woman, understanding that we have 4 seasons of a cycle within one moon cycle, so given 1 month, we're sort of have maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks if we're lucky to really utilize a bit more of that strategic masculine energy of the cycle, and then we go into a little bit more of a time that needs more rest and care. But we live sort of in a world where society doesn't really honor those cycles. So, what does it look like for you as an entrepreneur, as a female
Mm.
entrepreneur, knowing what you know, having the wisdom, but still needing to show up for the job?
Yeah, yeah, it's such a great question. And part of the way that I'm able to navigate that is because I am my own boss, and I have the privilege of the earned privilege, but it's still a privilege of being able to create my own schedule and
Yeah.
to create what that looks like. And as you know, I am very big into cycle tracking, and I'm very connected to my own menstrual cycle. I track my body temperatures, I track my cervical mucus, and so I pretty much know when I'm going to bleed like that day because I see the temperature drop, and that's a whole other story. But I know around when I'm going to have my inner winter, my menstruation, my moon, and I will look at my calendar and see, are there ways that I can work with this? And sometimes the answer is no. And I could still have a really busy week when I'm bleeding. But and that actually happened this week. I really try to prepare myself for that in a way that I can approach it more gentle. And so make sure that I have the teas by my side when I'm seeing patients, and that, all of my supports, my personal resources. And then if I am able to arrange my schedule so that I have more downtime for those first couple of days of my bleed, I will try to do that,
Yeah.
honestly. And it
Yeah.
makes a huge difference. It just is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd love to talk about herbs because I think it's probably a couple of years ago now when I came to see you as a patient, and there was a lot of transition going on in my life. I was definitely in a burnout, sort of teetering in a burnout zone. And you had given me sort of 4 herbal recommendations specific to my period. And not just that. I mean, I think what's important to know is that when we're so used to going to the doctor and they'll spend 5 to 10 minutes and it's like, see you later, here's the birth control pill, probably goodbye. You spend about 90 minutes usually like in your private practice, and really talking and understanding what the root of these things are and what's really going on. And then you leave and you get this like beautiful email PDF of meditations and journal prompts and herbs, and it's like the most beautiful holistic approach to care that I've personally ever experienced. And and I know that most of the listeners of this podcast are people likely with uteruses and that are really interested in these things. I'm curious, when it comes to the menstrual cycle, what some of your sort of like maybe favorite herbs or favorite practices. Some people, I think it's the education is in the consciousness around cycles is really rising and really experiencing that. But there's so many people that are still kind of like, ugh, my period, it's a hassle. Who cares? Let's just ignore it and go through. So, what are some of your kind of go-to plant allies when it comes to menstruation and practices? I know you mentioned
Yeah.
cycle tracking. What are your recommendations there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the first place to start, especially if someone is feeling like, oh, blah, like hate my period. I love when I bleed. Even if I have
Yeah.
some cramps, I'm like, oh, what a juicy good time. And so part of that stems from putting energy towards my cycle throughout all four phases, all four seasons of it. So I think before we even get into the plants and supplements and
Yeah.
things like that is really honoring and noticing what's going on when you're bleeding, what's going on when you're in your follicular phase in your spring, what's going on when you're ovulating, and what's going on before you bleed, which is another time that people tend to hate on that premenstrual phase. But when we start to pay attention to how we're feeling in our bodies, in our hearts during the entire cycle, it tends to make the bleed not feel as dreaded, even if there are cramps. So that's, I think, the first part is really connecting to the cycle throughout. And then in terms of herbal approaches to the menstrual cycle, it's so variable from person to person. And you probably would have suspected I would say that. But it's just such an individual, unique case by case situation.
Yeah.
So, there are definitely herbs out there that we think of and that have sort of become more popular for the menstrual cycle.
Mm.
And those are often, or I should say menstruation rather. And those herbs tend to be our uterine tonics. So herbs that tonify are really supporting healthy muscle contraction. So they're not too relaxed and they're not too tight. So we have a healthy tone. So things like red raspberry leaf, hibiscus, those are going to be really beautiful uterine tonics. I love mugwort for this. Mugwort's one of my big plant allies for bleeding. And so we want to think about uterine tonics. But that being said, from person to person, each individual is going to have different experiences during their menstrual cycle and may have different needs. So when I'm thinking and approaching about herbs for a particular person, I want to look at, what does their menstrual cycle look like as a whole? Are they having a lot of premenstrual symptoms? Do they need some hormone balancing support with something like motherwort or red clover? And then going into their bleed, let's say they have cramps. And this sort of goes more into the way like Chinese medicine doctors would approach, is looking at what is the quality of the cramps. Are they
Yeah.
sharp? Are they dull? Are they throbbing? Does it feel really heavy and congested? Do we need to move more blood? Do we need to get
Mm.
more circulation to the womb? So really looking at all of those factors, and also looking at the composition of, or the constitution of the
Mm.
person. Do they show signs of dryness or dampness? Do they show signs that their energy, their spirit is really hot on fire and we need to cool them down? Or are they really cold and we need to warm them up? So looking at all
Mhm.
of those things. So I don't have an exact answer of which specific plans, because it's going to be variable. But we this is the way that I would approach it with someone.
Mm, I love that. And I think, and there's sort of this idea maybe in the medical sort of Western medical system that it's often a little one size fits all, specifically for young women, where it's like, oh, you have acne and you have cramps and you are sexually active. And so like, here's birth control. It's going to solve all of your problems. And maybe it does for some, I'm not sure. It certainly didn't for me, and sort of knew what those effects were. And I think a lot of people know this story, but I struggled with an eating disorder a lot in my late teens, early 20s, subsequently lost my period. And so my journey to come to love my period was this long journey of actually losing it and wanting it to desperately to come back,
Yeah.
understanding this is a sign of health. And it took me years, I would say like a decade, to finally get to the point what you said, like, oh, like when I bleed, I'm like, yeah. There's something so powerful and profound and on a spiritual level, to me, it seems as though the veil is thinner and our ability to dream and intuit is so strong. And, I feel so sad that, with women and people who have periods that don't feel the same way or haven't had the opportunity to feel the same way about their bodies. And I'm curious, what was maybe there wasn't a shift, you always felt this way about your period, but was there a shift for you where you were like, I want to learn to love this part of me?
Yeah, definitely. It was not always like this at all. And, when I remember when I was in high school, I had very irregular periods because I was an athlete. It was that sort of, standard, like, track runner, soccer player, like was always active. And so
Yeah.
because of that, my periods were irregular. And my pediatrician wanted me on birth control. And I didn't really know anything about it, but intuitively, I said, no, I really don't want that. And
Mm.
then when I was 16, I had an unplanned pregnancy and an
Yeah.
abortion.
Yeah.
And it was a horrible experience and traumatic in several ways. Um, and afterwards, I was just kind of like, I'll do anything so that that doesn't happen to me again.
Mm.
And I remember going to my pediatrician's office for the follow up, and it was so sweet. We hugged, we cried together. And then it was just sort of like, without even really a conversation about it, here's a prescription for birth control pills. They're sort of like, hand me the prescription. And I don't remember even talking about like side effects or, anything like that. And I took it because I didn't want to get pregnant again. And I took it for probably about 5, 6 years, definitely through college. And after college, I started to notice really awful side effects, just sort of unacceptable. I went to my doctor. They said it couldn't be the pill. And I remember thinking, I've done my research, and there's definitely, these are side effects that are associated with the pill. They said, couldn't be the pill. We can put you on these other medications. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. So I went off the pill, went to a different doctor, got an IUD, and over the next decade went through about 3 different IUDs that had to come out for various reasons. Finally, because I was just in so much excruciating pain each cycle. And, it had been going on for a year. I was having horrible pain, horrible premenstrual symptoms, and just felt so disconnected to my body. This was also happening at a time that I was going through deep spiritual transformation as well and
Mm.
doing a lot of personal work. And so I think they were very much tied together.
Yeah.
Um, and because I was struggling so much with these sort of physical symptoms of my menstrual cycle, it really pushed me to focus more on like, what can I do about this? And so
Yeah.
started focusing more on things like cycle syncing and cycle tracking. I think also really wanting to use fertility awareness as contraception to prevent pregnancy. And so really tracking my cycle that way so that I didn't need to have the IUD anymore. I didn't need to have the birth control pill, but I could feel confident that I could prevent pregnancy by tracking my cervical mucus, my body
Yeah.
temperature, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. And I know a lot of our stories sort of mimic one another in that sense. And especially and then even with the IUD stuff, I was like, right, I went through all of that too. Um, and it just makes me think of sort of two things. One is there's like the shame piece of just being a woman, where we feel like our periods are innately shameful or, getting pregnant, abortion, all of these topics sort of carry with them the stigma and sort of shame. And then I think of grief too. There's a lot that goes on within our bodies that can feel so challenging and painful. We feel misunderstood, not believed, sort of like take this band-aid solution and even as a young person, you felt intuitively like, no, this doesn't feel right, but there's not a lot of directions to go. And I know this is why you are who you are today and do the work that you do, but it's so personal, right? Like it's this, and I'm sure that the women that come to you and that see you, they're probably, I would think, are a lot of tears. It is an emotional thing to talk about. And so what does sort of the shame or the grief or just the emotional heaviness of being with people in the work that you do specific to reproductive support and
Mm.
health?
What, just to clarify the question, like what
Yeah.
about the shame and the grief? It's definitely
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you work with it as a
Mm.
doctor and as a person
There you
that's supporting? I certainly didn't have any spaces where doctors were like holding space for me
go. Yeah.
to be with
Yeah.
those things. And I'm just curious the role that it plays or the role you play within it.
Totally. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. That makes a lot of sense. And yes, there's a lot of grief, a lot of shame. As you know, a part of my practice, I focus on abortion work, so abortion services and post-abortion counseling and support. But not just in the abortion work. I think with reproductive health in general, whether it's sexual trauma or just feeling shamed and embarrassed about the menstrual cycle. Um, some ways to approach it when I'm working with people, when we're one on one in front of each other, is allowing the emotion to be there, is saying like, okay, there's grief here, let's be with it. What does grief feel like in the body? Like, let's drop into that. Does it feel safe to close our eyes? Do we feel our feet on the ground? Do we feel the support of the earth beneath us? Do we feel like we're in a safe place that we can actually allow the grief or the shame to be here and notice, like, okay, wow, I'm really feeling it in my throat. What does it look like? Like, what does it want from me? And that kind of thing. So really sort of going into almost like a mindfulness of the body and emotion practices together. And I think being
Mm.
able to do it with someone else there also creates this safe space that if the emotion does start to feel too overwhelming, we can resource together and take a break and sort of direct to another way. So I think the mindfulness practices are incredibly helpful for that. Like, that's my tool that I go to as a practitioner to support others. And it comes from my own practice and having used those tools myself for my own grief and shame and anger and sorrow, all of those things.
Mm.
Um, I think the herbs can also be incredibly supportive for all of those things too. I think we talked a little bit more about using herbs for these physical symptoms, but these plant allies, they have ushered me through so much grief with so much
Mm.
love and support. And, turning to the plants as well is incredibly helpful. And that might look like making recommendations for infusions for someone to make at home, or actually sitting together and moving through a guided plant meditation to connect to
Mm.
a plant that might be supportive for whatever's going on.
Mm, I love that. I certainly feel that way with herbs, and they're like your little friends in your kitchen that you can go and be with. And I remember a couple of years ago, I was asking like how much this herb goes into this infusion, and you're like, just put it in your hand and close your eyes and like be with the plant. And it's just, to me, it feels revolutionary to work with my body in this way. I was a sick kid. I had a lot of asthma. I was always in and out of the emergency room. And it was always like, was just used to going like, here's the drug for the thing, goodbye. So to actually sit with someone, you, but, I don't know how many other people, doctors are doing this type of work that you're doing in this way, but to sit and be heard, be listened to close your eyes, to breathe, to drink these herbs, to have these recommendations. Like, to me, it just feels like it's so funny. I'm like, it feels like the future, but it also feels like the past. This is like the way the
Mhm.
medicine women work. This is the way the shamans work. This is, so to sort of bridge these worlds, these two worlds together, because modern medicine has its place. I mean, every now and again, I still need to have like my asthma inhaler with me. I
Totally.
barely take it, but I have it. I have it.
Yeah.
I hit you up. I'm like, I need a new prescription. Like, I'm not, I know where it comes in, but I also know there are other places to seek and to look with this. And it does feel intuitive, something I've always known. It's like, it can't just be this one thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that you brought that up, and thank you for doing that. And especially when you were talking about, even just sort of dosing the herbs, and how we talked about, like feel it in your hand and what feels right, and giving you some basic guidelines. But I think that really speaks to this tradition of herbalism that I was trained in. And a shout out to my teacher, Marisha Mernaska, who's just the loveliest. And, I'm trained in folk herbalism that's rooted in what's called the wise woman tradition of healing. And this is different from the conventional system that's really a scientific method. It's even different from like functional medicine, which kind of has this heroic aspect to it. And in the wise woman tradition, it's all about nourishment and all about acknowledging the body's innate wisdom to heal. And in that, there is so much empowerment to the person themselves to be their own healer, to listen to their body, and for you to decide, like, actually today, Steph told me that this would be a good starting place for the amount of red raspberry, but today, like, I think I need double that. Like, I'm really feeling that. And like, for you to have that knowing and that intuition and that connection to the plants, to your own body, that you get to decide, like you don't need me to tell you to do that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
very much it's very much a non-hierarchical way of approaching medicine
Yeah.
and healing, so that
Yeah.
we're partners. Like, I'm not the doctor up here and you're the patient and here. Like, we're on the same plane,
Mm.
and like, you are your body's greatest healer, and you know your body better than anyone else.
Mm. Yeah, it makes me think of this, and that's such a paradigm shift, and at least was for me. And I think I really love the work of Louise Hay, which is she wrote this book called "You Can Heal Your Life," and just how certain symptoms are often connected to emotions. And when I started to get into that work, and in Chinese medicine too, traditional Chinese medicine, lungs are about grief, and
Yeah.
Louise Hay's work. Asthma is like inability to breathe on one's own. And I think so much of my life, I felt a victim to my life. Like other people had the power, I didn't. And as I started my spiritual journey and stepped into my own sort of power and ability to breathe, I'm literally a breathwork teacher now, so it's not funny. It's just, of course, perfect. Um, but I started to see that I really had that agency. I could breathe on my own, and the processing of my own grief healed a lot. And like I said, still sometimes need my asthma inhaler, no problem, but also look to other herbs that have been so supportive. And so I just think to take the power back, and kind of what you were saying, like I have the ability to heal. I have the ability to find empowerment within myself. And so much of that came from just listening. All of the
Mhm.
symptoms I had throughout my life were mostly just a product of burnout, trying to be someone that I was other people wanted me to be, trying to achieve
Mhm.
something that wasn't even my path. Of course, my body was getting sick because the body is this beautiful barometer of truth
Mhm.
saying, like, no,
Yeah, yeah.
listen, no. And if you're not going to listen, here we go. And so
I'm gonna tell you.
um, I'm going to keep telling you. And I used to feel like it was my body betraying me. You're
Mm,
betraying me. You're not doing the thing I want you to do. And now I see it as my body is helping me, showing
mm,
me, being the guiding light. And I think that switch, even for you as a doctor, I think a lot of doctors is like, okay, what's wrong? Treat the thing. But you're saying, no, like, let's look at the holistic picture of a human, all
yeah,
aspects, and then empower you to do the healing as you sort of
yeah,
gently guide and offer. It's so revolutionary.
yeah, yeah. That's
Yeah, it's
beautifully said. Couldn't say it better.
so I'm curious, some of your uh practices. I know, and I'd love to hear it in your own words. I know nature is,
Yeah.
is your place, is your teacher, is the source for you. Um, Having beautiful baths and walks, and you have your cat. So I'm curious, like, what are the things that nourish and fulfill you because you are giving so much to so many?
Frozen.
Oh.
I
I'm
heard
back.
up until I heard up until nature is the source for you.
Yes. So, nature, what are the ways you take care of yourself? I know
Mm.
nature, baths, you've got your cats, you've got, the things that nourish you because you give so much to the world. So, just curious about your self care practices.
Yeah, thank you. I just like you said, nature is my source, and I live down here in Venice, and I really make it a priority to get up to the mountains, to Topanga, to be in nature and hike once a week if I can. And some weeks it doesn't happen, but I'm pretty on it because that restores me. It builds my energy up again. I can literally feel it in my bones when I come home from a hike. It has also, these places in nature around us have held me through so much in these last few years, coming back after the pandemic, through heartache, through the trials and tribulations of starting a business, that those places in nature have truly held me. And I'm incredibly grateful for it, and grateful to live where I do, so that it's accessible, and to again have a schedule that allows me to have the flexibility to make sure that I get up there once a week. So definitely nature. The work with the plants, it's amazing. Like, I might be in a funk doing work from home, and I'll be like really in it and feel really stuck. And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go and make some plant medicine. I'm gonna take a break, and I'm gonna go make a tincture, or I'm gonna go make some oil. Or I might pause and go and sit and make a cup of tea and do a meditation to connect with the plant of that tea. So the work with the plants, again, incredibly grateful to Marisha for teaching this way of connecting to the plants and their spirits. Um, and also the plant work through things like vaginal or yoni steams is
Mhm.
incredibly helpful and healing to me. I'll make infusions to bathe with in the bathtub with candles, and it really is, like the water. It's just such a safe, womb-like space for us, and really helps us move emotion, relaxes the body. So bathing is a really important part of my care practice. I feel like we've sort of lost the art of bathing in this culture, which I've been really reflecting on a lot. One of my favorite places to go is the Korean spa, because
Me
it is,
too.
it just is so healing. Um, you mentioned my cats, sweet little guys. You're spending time with them, and then also, I think part of it is that nourishment aspect. I think over the last several years, I've really found pleasure and um, and this just like yummy feeling from cooking and preparing food for myself and nourishing myself. That I'd never been like a big cooker before, but I really
Mhm.
enjoy the practice of creating a meal.
Mm. Yeah, it speaks to this really sort of slow, feminine, deep, uh, taking time. And when you were talking about bathing, I mean, I love my baths too. I was thinking about, I mean, we both live in LA, and it's like um, the ice bath kind of like capital of the world right now, and thinking of how um this like everyone's getting in ice baths, and it's this like fast quick hit adrenaline thing, and I'm like, yeah, and I do love an ice bath, but it's to me feels more sort of innately masculine and productive, and feel the rush of adrenaline so you can be more focused at work. And I'm just like, or that's beautiful. And I definitely
Yeah.
understand the benefits, but the slowness of like a hot bath and taking your
Yeah.
time and feeling your feelings, and
Yeah.
it's just it feels sort of more innately feminine and
Totally.
intuitive to do that.
And 100%. And I think also what you're speaking, like this sort of looking at those two things side by side, what it really speaks to is that need for balance, the yin and the yang, the masculine and feminine. Like it's not like one's good and one's bad. We need both in different timings, but it's just sort of noticing if you tend to always go towards that masculine adrenaline rushing, like get in the ice bath kind of thing, maybe it's time to start to gently move the other direction and also get some of that warm, slow, juicy practice in too. And vice versa.
Totally. Yeah. And we're all, and like you said earlier, we're all different. We all need different things. And I think, we're in winter right now, and when this podcast comes out it will likely still be winter, but Steph and I are speaking on right now the winter solstice, which is such a beautiful, deep, auspicious time, and really winter. Not, it's raining in LA right now. It's actually pouring right now in LA. But even in LA, we get this season. I was in Panama for a month, and it felt like fall there. It was fall. So even in these places where the sun shines, nature is still showing us seasons. And so there's the physical seasons, but then we have the internal seasons, obviously, of our cycles. And then we have kind of the seasons of, maiden, mother, mega, crone too, within our own aging process. And then sometimes we're just in a winter, regardless of the season. And I
Oh,
just love this metaphor. And nature teaches us so much about how to respond to life. And I'm curious right now, as we are in winter. Winter is about sort of the death, in the as you said, sowing the seeds in this sort of fertile earth. I'm curious what you're letting go of right now, or what's sort of ending or dying within your own life or your own spiritual practice. What is winter
mm,
representing to you?
I love that question. And I also, before I fully answer it, I want to mention, you spoke about we can be in a season of our life that's sort of outside of that season of the year. And I think, from 2020, the pandemic, up until probably last spring, I was in a deep winter. Like it was, there was a lot of stuff happening in there. And it was so palpable. Sort of the end of this spring, I could sort of start to feel myself, like when the little like tulip bulbs are starting to come out of frosted snow, like there's still frost on the soil, but the little bulbs are starting to come out in the beginning of spring. And I could feel that in myself. It was sort of like all of this sort of deep personal work that I've been doing. It's moving into it. It's still going to be going on, but it's moving into a different direction. It's moving into
Yeah.
this spring. So that feels really salient for me right now, that what you
Mm.
mentioned about that. Um, and I think one of the things I actually wrote about this recently after an experience that I had in Mexico City for this training, that I got really sick, like vomiting, diarrhea, fever, just sort of like the whole works. I haven't been that sick. I can't remember the last time I was that sick. And I remember, and I kind of like laughed to myself about this, but I remember just like laying on the bathroom floor with my head over the toilet. Sorry if this is TMI. And just thinking like, okay, yeah, like I'm throwing up right now, but like, what am I actually purging right now? Like, what am I actually letting go of? To speak to your question. And one of the things, there were a few things, but one of the things that really came through strongly for me was this sense of like duality or binary, and myself as a practitioner, as a health, medical, and healing practitioner, that I have to be one way or the other. I think when I started this practice, I felt really nervous for like my colleagues from conventional medicine to see what I was doing, because I was like, well, how are they going to judge me? What are they going to think? Are they going to think I'm crazy? And that was something I really had to work through. And I feel like I am in this place now, and this is what came to me when I was head over the toilet, is like it actually doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. Like I am so rooted and grounded in the traditions that I have trained in, and in the traditions that I practice with the people that I work with. And I have such a faith and belief in the way that I'm working now, that it doesn't matter. And like, yes, sometimes I am going to prescribe antibiotics, and other times we're going to talk about antimicrobial plants that can support someone. And it doesn't have to be either or, it can be both, and they can support each other beautifully.
Yeah. I love that. And I was just having this vision of like, your colleagues that, who knows how they think, but they probably all need you. At the end of the day, a lot of my yoga retreats are filled with women actually in the medical industry, nurses, doctors, and they need Dr. Steph. They need their herbs.
We
I
all need
love that.
those.
And we all need the herbs. That's so beautiful. And I anyone who's like maybe had food poisoning or been sick like that, that is the ultimate purge. And I love when you sort of bring the emotional aspect to it or the spiritual aspect to it, because again, the body is speaking to us in so many different ways, and the release or the letting go of what's here. And it's a part of the spiritual path, is when we release these dualities. We get rid of good, bad, right, wrong, should, shouldn't, and we just step into just a field of possibility. And but it's brave. It's a brave and courageous act to do so, because you're breaking out of the template of the conditioning of the Western medical world, and also just how we are conditioned as just people in general in this society. There's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things, and so um, I would just assume that there had to be a lot of bravery stepping onto this path. And then even looking at the work you do in reproductive health and abortion access and care, specifically at this time, it's these are big things that you're tackling. And I'm curious if you had any backlash in the work that you're doing, in particular in abortion care.
Hmm. That's a good question. I mean, there's definitely, um, you know, uh, definitely sort of people who will make comments or send direct messages on Instagram, who are very much against abortion. And I'm actually like, I have a lot of compassion. I try to find a lot of compassion for people that feel those ways about it, because I can see like they, in their heart, in their belief system,
Yeah.
they believe that this is like I'm doing something really wrong, and
Yeah.
they're trying to do something to support their belief system. Um, so I have a lot of it's a sort of complex thing. I have a lot of compassion, and sometimes it makes me angry and it makes me upset. Like I don't deserve this kind of treatment. But I also see like, okay, like like they have their own thing with that, and
Mm.
um, I have such a deep conviction in the importance of abortion access for the sovereignty of all of us with uteruses. And so, even if you never need to have an abortion, just the fact that you have it available to you if you need it is so important.
Yeah.
And I think that sovereignty, in our reproductive health, it also plays into our society and in the patriarchy and the way that women are treated in the patriarchy. And so I think part of finding balance in the society that we live in is bringing more feminine energy into it. It's not saying that the patriarchy is bad and that a matriarchy would be better. It's just saying we need a balance of both. And I think a part of that is having freedom and sovereignty. And
Yeah.
abortion is part of the sovereignty.
Yeah.
Um, I don't
Agreed.
know if I answered your
Yeah,
question.
you did. And I'm curious, as a follow-up question of, the so and it's so beautiful, like the compassion for people that, don't understand and want to uphold, whatever their belief system is. And then also sort of the to me, sometimes even when you're saying that, I was like, there's like this sacred rage that bubbles up in me. And I know that you are the holder and keeper of many stories, and so am I. We sort of hold and keep the stories of women and young people that have been abused and assaulted and raped, and had to, and I'm sure you seen so much in the work that you've done too. That sometimes for me, it's like it's all too much, and it's like this sacred rage, and it's not even mine. It just sort of feels like this ancestral, collective, universal energy. Sometimes my husband gets the brunt of it, where I'm just like, "How dare you be a man near me? Get away!" I've worked through a
Yeah,
lot of that, but there is just this thing that sort of bubbles up, and I'm curious if you a relate to that, or b have any practices of how you move with
yeah.
that rage.
Thank
Yeah.
you for bringing that up. It speaks to my experience so much. There were times when I still had my IUD that I would be laying on the couch, curled up in a ball, feeling so much excruciating pain, and having this knowing this is not my pain.
Mm.
It's ancestral. It's collective. It's not mine, but I'm holding it right now, and being really gentle and loving to my own body to let it flow out of me is part of it. It comes up a lot in ceremonial spaces and with plant medicine, with psychedelic medicine. There's such this thread for me in my experience in those spaces of collective grief. Recently I had one where the message just kept saying like the mothers need more, and by mother it felt like women, like we need more. We need more support, we need more voice, we need more of a seat at the table. So that comes up for me in those spaces, which is also healing because it allows it to flow. And then I have a therapist who I work with on this stuff too. Like I have that support, I seek out support. um, we are not meant to do this work alone, and it's a lot to carry. And so having safe spaces and containers where it can be shared, and just like you can see in my body, I'm just had like a big sigh, and my shoulders went down. It just like let it out. And finding
Totally.
community. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And that it's so why I cherish our friendship. And like I said earlier, like this sort of speaking of the same language. And I similarly, like in the medicine or the plant medicine space, ceremonial space, for me, it's like always something around, a birthing or a bleeding or a releasing and a freeing really of women. And I feel that sometimes too, like if I come back from a big retreat holding a lot of space for women or teens, and then my next bleed is usually a heavier bleed, a more painful bleed, and my body is like processing and moving it through, and so creating a lot of space and nourishment and time, even though it's pain physically is painful. It
Yeah.
feels like my body is sort of doing that work, and it's the internal ceremony often. The period is like this internal ceremony of release and shedding on many
Yeah.
levels, and being in nature, dance, breath work, like
Oh, yeah.
screaming, stomping my feet, having those spaces to get really
Totally.
messy too, right?
Yeah, the other day I
Yeah.
was working with someone. We were on a video call, and there was so much there for her. And so we both got up together on the call, and we just started shaking it out for like 5 minutes and like screaming and grunting, and just and we both felt better, so much better
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah, the primal, that sort of primalness of using our voice and our bodies. And I think, when we've been conditioned to be good little girls and smile and, be quiet, etc., there's so much bubbling within us. And then compounded by not being believed, or, having, a lot of our innocence taken from us, etc. The list goes on and on. There is so much collective, universal, and ancestral pain. And women like yourself and the work that, certainly that we're up to is about breaking a lot of those sort of generational things, getting louder, like
Yeah.
giving women more, giving ourselves more, changing it. And I really do. It makes a difference. I always say when I sit in circles with women and girls, like we're changing the world by letting our
Mhm.
voices be heard and letting our pain be witnessed and sort of uncovering our own shame, and having these conversations are certainly is a form of medicine.
Yeah, yeah, and I love what you said about the sort of those primal acts. And one of my teachers in a psychedelic therapy space, she says, she tells us, don't reinvent healing. Like, we know what heals: dancing together, singing together, drumming together, playing music together, being in community. Like we don't need to reinvent healing, people. Like, we have these primal, sort of instinctual ways that really support us through.
Hmm. I love that. Yeah, it's so true. Even though the wellness industry is always trying to like reinvent something and sell it back to us, but it really is so simple. I get asked all the time, especially with Girlvana. It's like, "But what did you do?" Parents will be like, "But what happens?" I'm like, "We go into nature for a week. The girls are off their phones. They're in the sunlight. They're swimming in the ocean. We're dancing. We're laughing. We're crying. We're journaling. We're moving. We're breathing. We're witnessing
Yeah.
our stories. That's it. That's the formula, but that should be everyone's formula: sunlight, nature, nourishment, community,
Movement.
move. Yeah.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah. But we forget, even myself, I'll have a couple days where I'm in a funk and I'm like, what's wrong with me? I'm like, oh, I just like haven't moved enough or haven't been outside. And it's so simple, and but it takes commitment, right? My teacher always says discipline begets joy, and just this idea of being disciplined and showing up to these things given the day, the season that you're in, what the body needs, because it's always so different.
Totally.
This is a question that I ask all guests, and it's sort of a undescribable, ineffable sort of thing. But I'm curious, in your own words, of what is divine? What is divinity or God or source to you? Like, how do you put words to that?
Mm, that's a beautiful question. And it's one that I think initially it's hard to put into words, because for me, the divine or spirit, it's such a felt sense. It's like that sense of knowing, that sense of remembering. And I find that I access it most easily when working with the plants, when in nature, when connecting to the elements. It's like all that is all around us. It's the breeze, it's the running water, it's like that rock just sitting right in front of you, like doing its thing. It's that sort of in that felt sense that you get from
Mm-hmm.
seeing it, and
Mm.
also sometimes feeling seen by it. Um,
Mm.
yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for that definition. It's my favorite question to ask people, because it's sort of the words may be different, but I love the idea of felt sense. You feel it. Yeah,
Hmm.
you feel it.
Yeah.
So I know we're wrapping up. I could talk to you all day long. It's so
Yeah.
nice to just
I
be with
could
you. And
too.
how can people find out more about your work, or if they're local to LA and looking for an amazing doctor, herbalist, person like you, where can we find you?
Yeah, so I have a website that is www.colantoniomd.com. So it's my last name, md.com. And I work with people in different sort of settings. So for some people, we have sort of like a doctor-patient relationship where we focus on the medical side of things. There's some people that I work with as a mentor, and that can be around plant work, fertility awareness, things like that. Then there's some people that we marry the two. We do mentorship work and the clinical work together. So the website is a great place to start. On Instagram, I'm at Colantonio MD as well. And just, shooting me an email is a great way, giving me a call to see if it would be a good fit.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Steph, for the
Thank
work you
you.
do in this world. And you're such a bright light. And I just, yeah, deep bow to your creativity and what it takes to sort of carve a path in this way. And you're such a model of what it means to really listen to one's intuition and show up for the big work. And it's exactly what you're supposed to be doing in this lifetime. It feels so clear to me. And just love you so much. And thank you for sharing your heart with us all today.
Thank you, Ali. It's such a joy. And I feel like even from that first coffee date that we had in Venice. It was just like, okay, we get each other. And I feel like um, the work that both of us do is so aligned and so complementary. And so I love seeing what you're doing, and grateful that you exist and that you are doing it. And it's just been such a joy to know you, and so much love for you.
Mm, thank you.
Yeah.